So it's Tuesday, March 31st, 2026.
Right.
And if you look at the news today, I mean, the Supreme Court just handed down this massive 8-1 anti-LGBTQ ruling.
Yeah, a huge story.
Right. And Taylor Swift is facing this high-profile lawsuit over an album title. And in the Middle East, we are quite literally days away from what looks like World War III.
It really does feel like a boiling point.
It does. It's so intense. And amidst all of this, there's this one guy sitting at a keyboard in New York who believes he can stop the apocalypse with a 3-day countdown clock, live television, and 5 specific nations locked in a room in Delhi.
It's quite the image, isn't it?
It's wild.
Oh.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are stepping into a very specific, passionately written, and just structurally fascinating digital artifact today.
It really is a remarkable piece of primary source material. I mean, it serves as this real-time manifesto.
Yeah.
Published right in the middle of what the author clearly perceives as this global emergency. He's watching the machinery of international relations completely break down, and he's just decided to draw up a new schematic.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack this post. It's titled simply, Peace Deal. Possible.
A very bold title.
Very bold. And it's from a blog called Barackface, written by a man named Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. But we aren't just going to look at his blueprint for Middle East peace, though we will definitely get into the exact, granular mechanics of that later.
Right, because the context is everything here.
Right. We are trying to reverse engineer the worldview of the author himself. Because when you look at his digital footprint, you're looking at a mind that attempts to seamlessly blend hardcore geopolitics, the absolute bleeding edge of artificial intelligence, and this philosophy he calls spiritual economics.
It's a very unique intersection of interests.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why he designs this incredibly rigid, almost algorithmic peace plan, we first have to understand the mind of the architect drafting it. So who is this person drawing up these blueprints?
Well, that is the essential first step, right? Before we can evaluate the structural integrity of his peace machine, we have to analyze his unusually prolific output.
Prolific is an understatement.
It really is. So right at the top of the blog, the subtitle plants a very specific flag. It reads, I was Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Which is such an interesting anchor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's establishing this grassroots, boots-on-the-ground political reality. He's essentially signaling to you, hey, I know how political movements actually start on the pavement.
Right. He's claiming practical, operational experience, not just theory.
But then you look at the sheer volume of his writing. And, the archive on the site is staggering.
Oh, it's immense.
In March 2026 alone, so the exact month this peace plan is published, he has 99 posts.
99 in 1 month.
That is more than 3 essays a day. And the blog boasts over 4.7 million total page views. But what strikes me isn't just the volume, it's the breadth of the topics. It's almost schizophrenic.
Well, schizophrenic might be the wrong word. I think interconnected is perhaps more accurate here.
Okay, interconnected. How so?
If we look closely at the bibliography of his published books, which are listed right there on the sidebar,
Yeah.
it initially reads like the curriculum vitae of, 5 different specialists.
Yeah, completely different fields.
Exactly. You have texts deeply entrenched in emerging tech, like agentic AI set to explode in 2026.
Right.
And the technologies behind agentic AI. But then he pivots completely into science fiction.
Oh, yeah, with novels like The Country of Geniuses, A Race Through AI Adolescence.
And Around the World in 1,000 Days.
Right, but then he also throws in these highly tactical business manuals like The 8-Step Sales Playbook or 30 Ways to Close Sales.
It's very practical, on-the-ground stuff again.
Yeah, and then suddenly you have sweeping geopolitical treatises like The $500 billion Pivot, how the India-U.S. alliance can reshape global trade.
Which is a massive macro-level topic.
Massive. And finally, he outlines an entire philosophical framework in a book titled Calquism, the economic and spiritual blueprint for an age of abundance.
Calquism, yeah.
So looking at this massive, sprawling list, I just have to ask, is this just the ultimate example of a hyper-online poster who thinks he's an expert in literally everything? Or does this frantic polymath approach actually lend a specific type of visionary weight to his peace proposal?
What's fascinating here is the underlying structural logic that connects all these seemingly disparate fields.
Okay, so you think there's a thread?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He isn't just dabbling. When you read across these disciplines, you realize he is a fundamental systems thinker.
Systems thinker.
Yes. Let's look at his focus on agentic AI. Now, agentic AI isn't just a basic chatbot that answers your questions.
It's not just generating text.
No, it refers to autonomous systems designed to pursue complex goals, self-correct, and execute multi-step processes without any human intervention.
So it's about setting an objective and letting the machine figure out the path.
Exactly. And someone who spends their time analyzing autonomous, goal-oriented systems doesn't look at human geopolitics as a series of isolated emotional incidents.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Right. They see networks, they see inputs, outputs, bottlenecks, and most importantly, broken incentive structures.
So you're suggesting he's trying to design an agentic peace process, like a system that runs on its own logic rather than relying on the good faith of the politicians involved.
Precisely. He is applying the structural, algorithmic logic of artificial intelligence and systems engineering to the chaos of human warfare.
That is wild.
It is. And regarding that frantic pace you mentioned, those 99 posts in March 2026, if you look at the titles, he isn't writing calm academic theory.
No, not at all.
He's chronicling a perceived global emergency in real time. He has titles like 30 Days of Operation Epic Fury.
And no king's protests.
Right, and Iran's underground missile cities and U.S.-Iran-Israel war the next few weeks.
It's like he's watching a massive escalating conflict unfold, and he's just tracking military movements and analyzing the information war, literally hour by hour.
He's effectively built his own open-source war room.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of his proposal.
Yeah.
Because his peace plan, it doesn't start with nuanced diplomatic overtures, right?
Yeah, not at all.
It doesn't use gradual de-escalation ladders. It starts with a sudden, violent halt.
Phase 1.
Phase 1. It's incredibly blunt. He writes, quote, "All parties stop fighting. Complete stop. Just stop."
Just stop.
But then he attaches this highly specific unilateral condition to this stop. He demands that Iran unconditionally and immediately stop blocking the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, and open it to global shipping exactly as it was before.
Right. Now, in traditional diplomacy, isn't everything about synchronized mutual de-escalation?
Usually, yes. It's a delicate dance.
Like, you withdraw your troops 10 miles, and I dismantle 2 missile sites. So why does he demand this massive unilateral action from Iran before a single word is spoken at the negotiating table?
To understand the mechanics of that specific demand, we have to look at the geography and the economics of the Strait of Hormuz
Okay.
and how he writes about it in his other posts from that exact month. Specifically pieces like, Britain isn't running out of oil, but the Iran war, and opening the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, the U.S. can do it.
So what's the deal with the strait?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a waterway that is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
21 miles. That's nothing.
It's an incredibly tight bottleneck, yet roughly 20 to 30% of the world's total oil consumption passes right through it.
Yeah.
It is arguably the most critical economic chokehold on the entire planet.
So if you block that strait, you aren't just hurting the military capabilities of your immediate regional enemies.
Not at all.
You are causing immediate catastrophic spikes in energy prices, you're spiking inflation in the West, and just totally disrupting supply chains globally.
Exactly. From a systems theory perspective, which we know he uses blocking the strait, isn't a localized military tactic.
Right.
It is an economic weapon of mass disruption, and it's aimed at the entire globe. Bhagat recognizes that you simply cannot negotiate the intricate nuances of a historic conflict while the global economy is actively being suffocated.
It distorts the leverage completely.
Exactly.
But I'm going to push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Because if it's Iran's best leverage, why on earth would they give it up unconditionally? Doesn't demanding they reopen it right away just sound like a pro-Western demand disguised as a neutral prerequisite?
That's a vital question. I wouldn't frame it as Bhagat siding with the West, though.
Okay, how would you frame it?
I see it as him attempting to equalize the baseline leverage in the room. He is arguing that the West already holds Iran's economy in a vice grip through decades of international sanctions, right?
Right. The sanctions are intense.
So by blocking the strait, Iran is doing the mechanical equivalent to the global supply chain. It creates this sort of Mexican standoff of economic annihilation.
Oh, okay. So everyone has a gun to everyone else's economic head.
Exactly. Bhagat's logic is that the artificial leverage of the blockade has to be removed so the system can just breathe. He's saying we can't negotiate the fire codes while the building is actively burning down.
That makes sense. Turn off the tap, stop the bleeding, and then we treat the underlying disease.
Precisely.
Okay, so the economic tourniquet is applied, the shipping lanes are open. Now we get to his diagnosis of why the traditional geopolitical medicine hasn't worked to cure this underlying disease.
And his diagnosis is sharp.
It's absolutely scathing. He is so critical of how diplomats have historically communicated. He writes, one-on-one does not work, one-on-one has not worked, back channels don't work, one-on-one gave us war.
It's a massive indictment of the entire modern diplomatic apparatus.
It really is, because that apparatus relies so heavily on secret negotiations, right?
It fundamentally challenges the prevailing wisdom of international relations. For centuries, the assumption has been that delicate matters require darkness.
Right, privacy.
The theory is that leaders need back channels to make concessions without losing face in front of their hardline domestic audiences.
Right. It's like corporate dark pools in finance,
Yes, exactly.
where these massive institutional trades happen off the public ledger just to prevent market panic.
Yes.
The idea is that if the public saw the messy sausage-making of political compromise, they'd revolt.
Right.
But Bhagat is saying that this lack of a public ledger allows both sides to falsify their balance sheets to their own citizens.
That is an excellent analogy. When diplomacy operates in these dark pools, leaders can speak the language of conciliation to their adversaries in private,
Right.
But then they continue to speak the language of holy war to their own citizens in public.
Yeah, they're playing two different games.
Exactly. Bhagat is looking at the empirical data of the Middle East, decades of secret talks, back-channel intermediaries, whispered agreements, and his conclusion is that the data proves the method is broken.
One-on-one gave us war.
Right.
I mean, think about it like a relationship. If you put historic enemies in a room without external observers, what actually happens to the psychological dynamic?
Well, this raises an important question about accountability.
Yeah.
When two historic adversaries meet privately, the conversation almost inevitably devolves into litigating past grievances.
Oh, for sure. It's like a couple trying to resolve a massive relationship-ending fight through passive-aggressive text messages instead of just going to a therapist.
Yes. It becomes a closed-loop system of historical whataboutism.
You did this in 1982.
Exactly, countered with, well, you overthrew this government in 1953.
It never ends.
It can't end. Without a neutral, objective observer demanding progress in the present moment, secrecy just becomes a shield for deceit and stalling.
The privacy literally allows them to move the goalposts indefinitely. So, if bilateral back channels are the toxic dark pools of diplomacy, what is his alternative? How do you force a public ledger?
This is where it gets highly theatrical.
Highly theatrical. This is where his plan pivots from, like, geopolitical critique into something that resembles high-stakes performance art.
Truly.
Because the framework he proposes is deeply specific. The players in the room, the United States, Iran, Israel, and crucially, the 5 BRICS nations.
Yes.
The setting, Delhi, India. The medium, broadcast entirely live on television.
Unprecedented.
And the constraint, a strict, unforgiving 3-day time limit.
3 days.
When I first read this, my immediate thought was, this is just a geopolitical reality show. Like Survivor, Middle East.
It does sound like television programming.
It does. So if we dig into the mechanics of this, how does broadcasting the fate of the world on live TV actually force radical transparency? Doesn't the presence of cameras just incentivize these leaders to play to their political bases?
That's the obvious fear, yes.
Won't they just posture for 3 days straight?
The instinct to perform for the camera is certainly the primary risk, but we have to analyze the structural constraints that Bhagat builds around the broadcast.
Okay, the constraints.
It isn't an open-ended debate forum, it is a 3-day countdown.
Right, the clock.
The ticking clock is a brutal forcing function.
It's like a software hackathon, but for preventing nuclear war.
Precisely. If you only have 72 hours, you simply do not have the temporal bandwidth for grandstanding.
You physically can't waste time.
Right. The adrenaline, the biological exhaustion, the sheer, undeniable finality of that clock winding down it forces a psychological triage.
It strips away all the polish of those prepared diplomatic statements.
Yes. But the genius of this framework isn't just the clock or the cameras, it's the specific guest list and the geographical location.
Right, let's talk about Delhi and the BRICS nations, because that feels like the linchpin of this entire strategy to me. He doesn't choose a quaint, neutral conference center in Geneva.
No.
Or a UN building in New York. Why Delhi?
If we connect this back to his book, The $500 Billion Pivot, How the India-US Alliance Can Reshape Global Trade, We see that Bhagat deeply understands the shifting center of global gravity.
A multipolar world.
Yes. Delhi is arguably the most strategically complex capital in the world for this specific scenario.
Why is that?
Well, India is a founding member of BRICS.
Right, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Correct. And BRICS is an economic bloc actively working to challenge Western financial hegemony, mostly through de-dollarization and building alternative trade networks.
So they are counterweight to the U.S.
Yes, but, and this is key, India simultaneously maintains deep, strategic, and massive economic ties with the United States.
Right, they aren't enemies of the West.
Exactly. Furthermore, India has historically managed a very delicate balancing act, maintaining vital relationships with both Israel and Iran.
Wow. So it's neutral ground, but it carries immense diplomatic mass.
It's heavy ground.
It's the capital of the most populous nation on Earth. The U.S. and Israel can't just dismiss India as a hostile actor. And Iran and the other BRICS nations view India as a peer in the global south, rather than some Western imperial outpost.
Exactly. By placing the U.S., Israel, and Iran in a room surrounded by the 5 BRICS nations, Bhagat is essentially surrounding the primary combatants with the heavyweights of the emerging multipolar world.
That's a lot of pressure in one room.
It is, because BRICS nations represent massive alternative supply chains. If BRICS is successfully building alternative clearinghouses to the SWIFT banking system, well, U.S. financial sanctions begin to lose their teeth.
Oh, I see. So by bringing BRICS to the table, he's forcing the United States to negotiate with the reality that their primary weapon economic sanctions might actually have an expiration date.
Exactly. The U.S. has to face its own vulnerabilities.
Then simultaneously, he's forcing Iran to face its potential new economic masters, right?
Yes.
Like, you can't lie or rely on historical stalling tactics when the economic titans of both the West and the East are sitting across the table watching you on live television.
It is a global intervention. There's no other way to describe it.
Intervention, yeah.
And inside this crucible, Bhagat just strips away the centuries of complex ideological debate. He distills the entire conflict down to absolute basics.
The very bottom line.
He writes, "We know what both parties want. Iran wants a full lifting of all sanctions. Israel wants the threats to be gone. Nuke, missiles, proxies."
And this is where I struggle with his logic a bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
He makes it sound like a cryptocurrency smart contract,
A binary exchange.
Right. A trustless exchange where a binary input like sanctions lifted automatically executes the output of centrifuges dismantled. But we are dealing with deeply embedded, multi-generational ideological movements here.
Yes, very complex human elements.
Proxies, like Hezbollah or the Houthis, aren't just military assets you can delete from a spreadsheet. They are complex, socio-political organizations deeply woven into the fabric of their respective countries.
Absolutely.
So by flattening this into a binary transaction of sanctions versus security, is he dangerously ignoring the reality on the ground?
I wouldn't say he's ignoring the complexity. He is making a deliberate tactical choice to bypass it entirely.
Bypass it.
Yes. He makes a profound observation in the text. He says, "It can feel like every possible argument and counter-argument has already been made before, but not in the right framework."
Okay.
Bhagat is arguing that the complexity itself has been weaponized by diplomats to avoid making a deal.
Oh, wow. So if you allow the conversation to be about the centuries of religious history or the intricate, localized web of militia politics, you will just never reach an agreement.
Never. The goalposts will constantly move.
Because there's always more history to debate.
Exactly. Ideological conflicts are, by definition, unsolvable unless one side completely capitulates. You simply cannot negotiate someone out of their fundamental worldview.
Right. You can't logic someone out of a belief they didn't logic themselves into.
Exactly. But transactions can be negotiated.
Give and take.
By defining security strictly as nukes, missiles, proxies, and demanding a total lifting of sanctions, she is establishing the absolute bottom line for survival. He is taking the soul out of the conflict so that the physical body of the region can survive.
Taking the soul out to save the body. That's an intense way to phrase it.
He's saying, we don't need you to like each other. We don't need you to agree on history. We just need you to execute this specific trade.
He's trying to engineer a system where peace is literally the path of least resistance.
Yes.
But let's look at the failure state of this system.
Yeah.
Because systems fail, right?
I do.
What happens if the 72-hour buzzer rings on live TV in Delhi? The world is watching, and human stubbornness prevails. Because Let's be honest, some leaders would rather watch the world burn than look weak on television.
That is a very real possibility.
So Bhagat anticipates this. He builds in a rigorous, globe-trotting safety net, which he calls Plan B.
The 12-month roadshow.
Right, the roadshow. If the 3 days fail, the framework shifts, but the personnel remains locked in.
They don't get to go home and forget about it.
Exactly. The exact same 8 foreign ministers, the combatants and the BRICS nations, they must meet in person over the next 12 months.
Right.
They will hold 4 one-day summits in 4 different capitals around the world.
Yeah.
And the absolute critical linchpin of this Plan B is this. During this entire 12-month period, Iran must agree to keep its nuclear program frozen.
No new work. Fully supervised.
Right. So imagine having to solve the most intractable crisis of your life, but you were forced to do it while dragging your adversaries on a jet-lagged world tour.
It sounds exhausting.
It does. Why the change in geography, though? Does the physical location of a negotiation actually alter the psychological mechanics of the diplomats?
Geography fundamentally alters the psychology of diplomacy.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. By mandating 4 different capitals around the world, Bhagat is structurally ensuring that no single nation ever holds a continuous home court advantage.
Okay, that makes sense.
If negotiations only take place in Washington, the atmospheric pressure of the American political apparatus subtly influences the room.
You feel the weight of the U.S. government.
Yes. And if they take place in Tehran, the supreme leader's proximity exerts pressure.
So it breaks the echo chamber.
Exactly. It forces them to constantly reorient themselves in different cultural and geopolitical contexts, reminding them that the world is much, much larger than their regional dispute.
Right. But let's drill down into that supervised freeze. No new work. To be supervised.
Right.
How does that specific mechanical requirement stabilize this 12-month window? Because 12 months is a long time in geopolitics.
It is a long time. But this is perhaps the most elegant piece of systems engineering in the entire proposal.
Why is that?
Because it addresses the core existential fears of both sides simultaneously.
Okay, break that down for me.
Let's look at Israel. Israel's immediate overriding terror is a completed Iranian nuclear weapon.
Right.
What the non-proliferation community calls breakout time, the time required to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for one nuclear device.
The ticking clock.
A supervised freeze, monitored by the IAEA, halts that ticking clock. It essentially pauses the breakout time.
So the sweat stops growing.
Yes. By removing the immediate threat of a sudden nuclear strike, it theoretically removes the immediate justification for preemptive, unilateral military strikes by Israel.
It puts the fire on pause.
Yes. But equally importantly, it offers something vital to Iran.
Which is?
Diplomatic dignity.
Ah.
It doesn't demand the immediate, humiliating dismantling of their entire nuclear infrastructure overnight as a prerequisite just to sit at the table.
Right, which they would never agree to anyway.
Exactly. It simply says press pause. It offers them a phased, active diplomatic process where they are seated as equals alongside the U.S. and the BRICS nations over 12 months, rather than forcing an outright surrender.
So it balances the West's need for existential security with the East's demand for national sovereignty.
It's a very delicate structural balance.
But the clock is still ticking, right? Just on a longer timeline. 12 months, 4 summits. And if that global tour yields absolutely nothing, if the diplomats fail to execute the transaction after all that.
And we reach the failure state.
Right. And this is where the peace plan reaches its conclusion. And frankly, the digital medium of the post becomes just as vital as the text itself here. Let's look at his final demand and then the visual chaos that follows it.
The conclusion is a brutal rejection of the bureaucratic elite.
It's savage. He writes, quote, "Hopefully over 12 months, the 8 foreign ministers will have come up with something. If not, what good are they? Fire them." And then he puts a smiley face.
Fire them.
He literally puts a smiley face at the end of a demand to terminate the world's top diplomats.
It's so dismissive.
It is. And then immediately beneath that smiley face, the blog post just completely breaks down visually.
Yes, the formatting collapses.
There are 14 consecutive broken YouTube video embeds. Just these massive gray boxes taking at the screen reading, "An error occurred. Try watching this video on www.youtube.com or enable JavaScript if it is disabled in your browser."
14 of them.
Yeah, 14 of them, stacked vertically. It's jarring. It's like walking into a pristine museum to view a masterclass in strategic geopolitical theory and discovering that half the paintings have been slashed and left on the floor.
That's a very evocative way to put it.
What does this frantic posting style, complete with entirely broken tech, Tell us about the reality of this moment in March 2026.
Well, it tells us everything about the environment he is operating in, and it connects directly back to his focus on information architecture.
Okay, how so?
We have to look at another piece he published that exact same month titled YouTube, the primary battlefield of information war.
Ah,
Those 14 broken videos aren't just sloppy formatting. They are artifacts of the conflict itself.
wait, you're suggesting those videos were actively taken down or censored by the platforms?
It is highly probable in this context. In a modern conflict, especially one Bhagat is labeling Operation Epic Fury, the control of narrative is as critical as the control of airspace.
Information is a weapon.
Yes. We are looking at the realities of the splinternet, where different regions experience entirely different versions of the web during wartime.
Right, because of geo-blocking and algorithms.
Exactly. Videos of civilian protests, unauthorized military strikes, or suppressed political speech are constantly being uploaded and then algorithmically throttled, actively censored, or geo-blocked by state actors.
So the decay is the point.
The digital decay of this post, those 14 massive error boxes, perfectly represents the friction and chaos of the information age during wartime. He's trying to show his readers the raw, unfiltered reality of the conflict, but the medium itself is collapsing under the weight of the war's censorship mechanisms.
The medium is the message.
Exactly.
The structural failure of the blog post mirrors the structural failure of global diplomacy. Which brings us back to that smiley face. Fire them.
That line is the ultimate key performance indicator, or KPI, applied to international relations.
A KPI for world peace.
Yes. It reflects a massive, boiling populist frustration globally. The world is watching career diplomats maintain their status quo, holding endless catered summits in Geneva, releasing carefully focused groups' statements,
While nothing changes.
while the actual population suffer the crippling inflation, the supply chain collapses, and the physical violence of the wars they fail to prevent.
Yeah.
Bhagat is demanding action over optics. If you, as a foreign minister, cannot solve a problem with the entire world watching, backed by the BRICS nations, over a 12-month period, you are fundamentally unqualified for the job.
You're just bad at your job.
The smiley face highlights the sheer absurdity that these individuals face zero professional consequences for catastrophic failure.
It's the ultimate corporate performance review applied to geopolitics. Fail to stop World War III. You're fired. Please hand in your badge and pack up your desk.
Exactly.
It's incredibly cathartic to read, honestly. But before we wrap up this deep dive, we have to zoom out and look at the periphery of this digital artifact. Because this blog post doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Context is everything.
The beautiful thing about archive web pages is that they capture the noise of the era. Let's look at the sidebar of this blog to truly understand the cognitive environment of Tuesday, March 31st, 2026.
The sidebar is a masterclass in modern cognitive dissonance.
It really is.
It curates the news links that Bhagat aggregated on that exact day, providing a raw snapshot of the global zeitgeist.
It is wild to read this list.
Okay.
On one hand, you have massive, earth-shattering, generational headlines. The New York Times is reporting an ominous U.S. threat against Iran.
Right.
Foreign Policy magazine has a deep dive asking, does Iran's future look like Cuba, Syria, or North Korea?
Existential questions.
Vox is covering a devastating 8-1 Supreme Court ruling regarding anti-LGBTQ plus conversion therapy. Fired FBI agents are filing class action lawsuits claiming deep state political retaliation. Japan is announcing massive, structural 2040 carbon emission targets to fight climate change.
The world feels incredibly heavy reading those.
So heavy. The geopolitical tectonic plates are audibly cracking.
It paints a picture of a world facing multiple intersecting existential threats, from nuclear war to democratic collapse to climate catastrophe.
But then,
Yeah.
interspersed right alongside the threat of nuclear war and monumental Supreme Court rulings, you have the machinery of the distraction economy.
The contrast is jarring.
It is. You have Taylor Swift being sued over an album title called Life of a Showgirl.
Right.
You have a highly optimized Wired article titled The Best Time to Drink Coffee for Productivity and When Not to.
Productivity hacks during the apocalypse.
Exactly. You have a New York Times Magazine piece on what 1 month of intense red light therapy did to my mind. It is mind-bending.
It really highlights the splintered nature of our attention.
You are literally reading about the potential deployment of nuclear weapons.
Sure.
And right next to it, the internet is urgently instructing you on how to optimize your adenosine receptors with an espresso and tracking the intellectual property disputes of a pop star.
Yeah.
How do we synthesize this? Why do we focus on micro-optimizing our coffee intake while the macro world burns?
It is the defining psychological coping mechanism of the 2026 digital experience.
Coping mechanism. Okay.
When the macro environment, the Strait of Hormuz, the Supreme Court, the climate, feels entirely out of the individual's control, people retreat into micro-optimizations.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
You cannot control the deployment of a proxy militia in the Middle East, but you can control exactly what time you expose your face to a red light therapy lamp.
Right. It gives you a sense of agency.
The machinery of daily optimization and celebrity culture provides an illusion of control and predictability in a world that is completely unpredictable.
It's the ultimate splintered attention span. We are doom-scrolling the apocalypse with one hand and ordering productivity supplements with the other.
And this bizarre juxtaposition actually serves as the ultimate validation for Bhagat's radical, highly structured peace plan.
Wait, how does the Taylor Swift lawsuit validate his peace plan?
Think about the challenge he faces. In a world this chaotic, this noisy, where the threat of global war has to compete for screen time with a pop star's legal troubles, how do you get anyone to actually focus?
Yeah.
How do you generate enough sustained, unified public pressure to force leaders to compromise?
Because the dark pools of diplomacy rely on public distraction.
Exactly.
If everyone is arguing about the Supreme Court or Taylor Swift, the diplomats can just keep stalling in secret.
Precisely. The only way to cut through that profound noise is to create a spectacle so intense and so structurally rigid that it forces the world to stop scrolling.
So the live TV element isn't just a gimmick.
No, it's essential. A forced live TV summit with a 3-day ticking countdown clock in the heart of Delhi isn't just a quirky diplomatic tactic. It is an information war strategy specifically engineered to hijack the splintered attention span of humanity.
It turns peacemaking into a high-stakes, inescapable global event.
Yes. He is designing a peace process for an era of terminal distraction.
You have to make the stakes existential, the timeline incredibly short, and the broadcast live, or else everyone just goes back to their red light therapy while the supply chains collapse.
That is the grim reality he's designing for, yes.
Man. Okay, let's take a breath and just recap the sheer distance we've covered today.
It's been a journey.
We started by reverse engineering the mind of an incredibly prolific, systems-thinking former Obama volunteer who views global conflict through the lens of agentic AI and algorithmic logic.
Right.
We watched him apply a hard mechanical brake to the Strait of Hormuz, turning off the tap of global economic disruption before attempting to treat the diplomatic disease.
The tourniquet.
We examined his total rejection of the dark pools of secret back-channel diplomacy, replacing them with the radical transparency of a live TV pressure cooker in the strategically massive capital of Delhi.
Flanked by the BRICS nations.
Flanked by BRICS, exactly. We saw him strip away centuries of complex ideological grievances, flattening the conflict into a binary smart contract transaction. The lifting of sanctions for the dismantling of nuclear threats and proxies.
Taking the soul out to save the body.
And finally, we explored his failsafe, the 12-month globe-trotting Plan B that pauses the nuclear clock and ends with a populist demand to simply fire the diplomats if they fail to deliver.
It is a remarkable, challenging synthesis. He blends geopolitical theory, systems engineering, and an acute, almost cynical understanding of modern media dynamics into a highly executable blueprint.
It really challenges how we think about solving massive problems. And digesting this level of strategic theory, analyzing a snapshot of a future-present world teetering on the edge, it takes serious mental bandwidth.
It certainly does.
But we hope it was as illuminating for you to listen to as it was for us to unpack. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on the core mechanics Bhagat laid out today. When you look at the entirety of Peace Deal, Possible, the author does something very subtle but profoundly powerful. He removes human emotion from the equation entirely.
Completely.
He places the burden of peace on the process rather than on ideology or empathy. He never asks the warring factions to suddenly agree on morals or history or religion.
He doesn't care if they agree.
He doesn't ask them to forgive each other at all.
No.
He simply asks them to submit to a ticking clock, a live camera, and a structurally balanced room. He trusts the architecture of the system to force the outcome, regardless of how much the humans inside it despise one another.
It's a mechanical solution to a human problem.
Right. So think about the intractable, seemingly impossible conflicts in your own life. We all have them, whether it's a fractured family dynamic spanning decades, a toxic workplace standoff, or a relationship paralyzed by endless relitigation of past grievances.
We've all been there.
If a structurally rigid environment, extreme transparency, a ticking clock, and neutral oversight could theoretically force historically adversarial nations to put down their weapons,
Rah.
what might happen if you applied that same algorithmic architecture to your own life?
That's a fascinating question.
What impossible personal standoff could actually be solved by simply refusing to text in the dark, bringing the argument into the light of a neutral third party, stripping away the emotional history, and setting a firm 3-day timer to reach a transaction?
It changes the entire paradigm of conflict
It
resolution.
really does. Sometimes the only way out of a maze isn't to walk faster, it's to redesign the walls. Think about that. Until next time.